The Arctic wind howled outside the research station's reinforced walls, but Dr. Morgan Winters barely noticed. Hunched over her microscope, she was lost in the intricate dance of cellular structures, searching for answers about extremophile adaptation that might unlock new medical treatments. At 34, with cropped auburn hair and eyes the color of aged whiskey, Morgan had chosen isolation over the politics of academia. Here, among the ice and silence, science made sense. "Dr. Winters," her assistant Kenji called from the doorway. "There's something," his words cut off abruptly. Morgan looked up to see Kenji frozen mid-sentence, suspended in time like a photograph. Beyond him, a ripple appeared in the air, shimmering like heat waves over asphalt in summer. Morgan's heart hammered against her ribs as she reached for the alarm button. Too late, the ripple expanded, enveloping her in weightless silence. The last thing she saw before darkness claimed her was the strange violet light that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Morgan awoke on a surface that felt like silk but breathed like something alive. The chamber around her defied architectural logic, flowing curves that seemed to grow rather than be built, with walls that shimmered with bioluminescence. "You are awake, good." The voice didn't come through her ears but directly into her mind, melodic and unmistakably female. "I apologize for the abrupt extraction." Morgan turned to face her captor and felt her scientific mind struggle to categorize what she saw. The figure before her was humanoid yet distinctly alien, tall and willowy with skin that seemed to contain galaxies beneath its surface, shifting in patterns of deep purple and silver. Her eyes were entirely black except for pinpricks of light that resembled stars, and where hair should be, crystalline structures grew in intricate formations around a face of unsettling beauty. "I am Thalia, Queen of Aetheris," the being continued, moving closer with liquid grace. "Your species calls my world HD 189,733b, though that designation lacks poetry." Morgan found her voice. "Why am I here?" Thalia's expression shifted subtly, something like sorrow passing across her otherworldly features. "Because my world is dying, Dr. Winters, and according to prophecies written before your species invented the wheel, you humans might be our salvation." Morgan's scientist brain kicked in, overriding her fear. "That's not possible. Interspecies compatibility at that level is precisely why we chose you specifically," Thalia interrupted, gesturing with elongated fingers. A holographic display appeared between them, showing complex genetic structures. "Your research on extremophile adaptation showed remarkable insight. You understand that life finds ways to continue, even in impossible circumstances." Before Morgan could respond, alarms blared throughout the chamber. Thalia's posture changed instantly from regal to alert. "We are under attack," she explained, moving toward what appeared to be a control interface. "There are those among my people who believe seeking help from humans is blasphemy." The ship shuddered violently, throwing Morgan against a wall. Through a viewport, she saw smaller vessels firing upon them, their weapons leaving trails of energy that burned like magnesium. Thalia cried out as part of the ceiling collapsed, sending crystalline shards flying. Morgan acted on instinct, tackling the alien queen away from falling debris. They landed in a tangle of limbs, Morgan's body shielding Thalia's. Time seemed to slow as their eyes met. Where their skin touched, Morgan felt a strange, tingling sensation, like static electricity but warmer, more alive. Thalia's eyes widened in apparent surprise. "You saved me," she whispered directly into Morgan's mind, "even though I took you from your world." "Instinct," Morgan replied, suddenly aware of the alienness of the body beneath hers. Cooler than human, with a double-pulse heartbeat she could feel through her palms. Thalia reached up, her star-filled eyes searching Morgan's face. "Perhaps the prophecies speak truth after all. The first contact between our kinds was predicted to create a resonance. Do you feel it?" Morgan did, a humming between them where their skin met, like two tuning forks finding harmony. Scientific curiosity overrode her fear. "What does it mean?" she asked, helping Thalia to her feet as the ship stabilized. The Queen's expression was unreadable. "It means you may indeed be what we've searched for across 1,000 generations. It means hope, Dr. Winters." She paused, her stellar gaze intense. "And it means we must reach Aetheris before the rebels destroy any chance of saving my world." The royal vessel entered Aetheris' atmosphere like a shooting star, trailing a wake of iridescent particles. Morgan pressed her palms against the viewport, breath caught in her throat at the sight below. Crystalline spires rose from vast forests of what appeared to be mineral formations rather than vegetation, structures that pulsed with internal light in hypnotic rhythm. "It's beautiful," she whispered, genuine or momentarily displacing her scientific detachment. "You see only the surface beauty," Thalia replied, standing close enough that Morgan could feel the Queen's cool presence. "Look closer." At Thalia's gesture, the viewport magnified certain regions. Morgan's wonder gave way to concern as she noticed fracture patterns in the crystal formations and darkened patches in the mineral forests. "The degradation spreads." Thalia's mental voice carried notes of controlled anguish. "Our world is a unified system. The crystalline networks are not merely structures, but living extensions of our evolutionary path. As my people weaken genetically, so does our ecosystem." The ship descended toward a central metropolis where the tallest spires converged like frozen fountains. Morgan noticed figures moving below, beings similar to Thalia, but with less luminescence, their movements less fluid. "How long?" Morgan asked. "3 generations until complete collapse." Thalia's answer came with clinical precision. "I will be the last queen to rule an inhabited world unless we find salvation." The landing was smoother than any aircraft Morgan had experienced. Guards with crystalline armor awaited them on a platform that seemed to grow directly from the surrounding structure. Morgan felt their suspicious gazes as Thalia led her into the heart of the royal complex. "My council awaits," Thalia explained, guiding Morgan through corridors where light itself seemed alive. "They are divided on your presence." "I'm not surprised," Morgan replied dryly. "Alien abduction isn't exactly a diplomatic first contact protocol on Earth either." Something like amusement flickered across Thalia's features. "You possess humor even in dire circumstances. Remarkable." The council chamber revealed 7 Etherians seated in a crescent formation. Their crystalline headdresses were more elaborate than those of the guards, though less magnificent than Thalia's crown-like growth. One male rose immediately, his skin patterns pulsing with what Morgan recognized as agitation. "My queen, bringing this creature directly to our inner sanctum violates every security protocol," he projected, his mental voice sharp enough that Morgan winced. "This creature, Kalec, is Dr. Morgan Winters, whose genetic insights may save our children from deterioration." Thalia's response was regal, brooking no argument. "Her presence is my decree." An older female with faded skin patterns intervened. "The prophecies speak of compatibility, but they do not specify this method of salvation. Perhaps we misinterpret." Morgan stepped forward. "I'd like to understand exactly what's happening physiologically. If I'm going to help, I need data, not prophecies." Silence fell, the council members' star eyes widening at her audacity. Then, unexpectedly, Thalia laughed, a sound like crystal wind chimes. "This is why humans fascinate me," she told her council. "They demand understanding before belief. Show her Alara." The older female, apparently the head scientist, gestured to a central platform. Holographic projections appeared, displaying genetic sequences, birth records, and medical data that Morgan couldn't fully decipher but recognized as deeply troubling. "Each generation's telomere length decreases dramatically," Alara explained. "Our regenerative capabilities, which maintain both our bodies and our connection to the crystalline networks, are failing. The next generation will be born with barely enough strength to maintain consciousness." Morgan studied the data, her scientific mind fully engaged. "This looks like accelerated entropy, almost as if your genetic material is time decaying." She pointed to a particular sequence. "What's this marker here?" Alara seemed surprised by Morgan's quick comprehension. "That is the resonance gene. It allows us to synchronize with our world's crystalline frequency. It's degrading fastest of all." "And humans have an analogous gene?" Morgan asked skeptically. "Not analogous," Thalia interjected. "Complementary. Your species evolved on a planet with high background radiation and environmental stressors. You developed extraordinary genetic repair mechanisms that resonate at precisely the frequency our genes are losing." The implications hit Morgan like a physical blow. "You're not just looking for a genetic bandage, you're talking about hybridization." Kalec made a gesture of disgust. "This approach dishonors our ancestors. There are other paths." "There are no other paths." Thalia's mental voice cracked like lightning, her skin patterns flaring so brightly the council members flinched. I have watched children born too weak to cry, their connection to our world so feeble they cannot even feel its song. I will not be the queen who presides over our extinction because of pride. Morgan felt the weight of generations in Thalia's words. More surprisingly, she felt an unexpected protectiveness toward the alien queen whose burden seemed unbearably heavy. After the council dispersed, Thalia led Morgan to a private laboratory where samples of both species' genetic material were already being analyzed. Your council member, Galactic, seems to have personal objections beyond tradition, Morgan observed as they watched automated systems run comparisons. Thalia's patterns dimmed slightly. Once, he hoped to be my consort. My decision to seek salvation through humans feels like personal rejection to him. Is it? Morgan asked before she could stop herself. Thalia turned, her stellar eyes studying Morgan with uncomfortable intensity. I am queen before I am an individual. My personal desires have never factored into my decisions. Never, Morgan challenged softly. Something shifted in Thalia's expression, a vulnerability that made her suddenly less alien. Until now, perhaps. Her fingertips brushed Morgan's arm, sending that same harmonic resonance vibrating between them. Our scientists can explain the genetic compatibility, but not this feeling when we touch. It was not in their predictions. Morgan knew she should pull away, knew this growing attraction defied scientific rationality. Instead, she found herself leaning closer, drawn by something beyond understanding. A violent tremor shook the chamber, breaking the moment. Crystalline fragments rained from the ceiling as alarm tones filled the air. The network is degrading faster than predicted, Thalia explained, steadying Morgan. We must hurry. As they rushed toward the source of the disturbance, Morgan glimpsed the true fragility of this alien world. In that moment, she made a decision that transcended scientific curiosity. Whatever this resonance between them meant, she would explore it, not just for knowledge, but because something about Thalia's star-filled eyes and the weight she carried made Morgan want to help bear it. 2 weeks on Aetheris had changed Morgan in ways she couldn't fully articulate. She no longer flinched at the telepathic voices of the Etherians or marveled at the living architecture that responded to thought. What once seemed alien now felt increasingly familiar, especially the cooling presence of a certain queen who spent far more time in the laboratory than royal duties should allow. Your genetic repair mechanisms are extraordinary, Alara mused as she examined Morgan's cellular samples. Especially this sequence here, it's almost a perfect complement to our failing resonance gene. Morgan leaned closer to the holographic display. But simple gene splicing won't work. The compatibility is at a quantum level, not just biochemical. Which is why we've made little progress. Alara's patterns dimmed with frustration. Theory suggests the resonance must be activated through bioenergetic transfer, but we haven't determined the mechanism. Morgan felt Thalia's presence before seeing her, a subtle shift in the air, a quickening of her pulse that had become familiar. The queen entered the laboratory with characteristic grace, though Morgan immediately noticed the strain in her star eyes and the dimmer luminescence of her skin. You're pushing yourself too hard, Morgan said without thinking, then added hastily, Your Majesty. Thalia's lips curved slightly. In private moments, she had insisted Morgan use her name, though protocol demanded formality in public. The council debate lasted longer than expected. Galactic continues to argue for stricter isolation rather than integration. His influence grows, Alara warned. Many fear change more than extinction. Thalia dismissed the concern with a gesture. What progress here? Morgan explained their findings, trying to focus on science rather than how the Queen's proximity affected her. We need to understand the quantum resonance transfer better. All the simulations suggest it requires some form of direct energy exchange. But an alarm cut through the conversation, high-pitched and urgent. Security guards burst into the laboratory, crystalline weapons drawn. My queen, you must come immediately. There's been an attack at the eastern node. They rushed to the command center, where holographic displays showed a critical juncture in the crystalline network engulfed in destructive energy. Sabotage, a security officer explained. Someone destabilized the harmonic regulators. Galactic, Thalia asked, her voice dangerously quiet. No evidence yet, the officer replied. but the damage pattern suggests knowledge of royal protocols. Thalia's expression hardened. I must go there personally. The node requires royal resonance to restart. It's too dangerous, Morgan protested without thinking. The area's unstable. The Queen turned to her, something unreadable in those stellar depths. My people are connected to these networks. Their pain is already flowing into my consciousness. I have no choice. Thalia departed with minimal security, insisting that speed was essential. Morgan paced the command center, unable to explain her growing unease. When alarms sounded again an hour later, her worst fears materialized. Ambush at the node, a guard's voice crackled through the communications system. The Queen is injured, the transmission cut off abruptly. Morgan ran to the medical center, arriving just as guards carried in Thalia's limp form. A crystalline shard protruded from her chest, pulsing with sickly light. Assassination attempt, Alara explained grimly, examining the wound. The crystal is destabilizing her resonance field. If we remove it incorrectly, the quantum shock could kill her. Watching Thalia's skin patterns fade, Morgan felt a desperate urgency rise within her. The complementary resonance. Our tests showed human cellular fields can temporarily stabilize Etherian quantum patterns. Alara shook her head. Theoretical only, we've never. She's dying, Morgan pushed past the scientist, placing her hands on either side of the crystal embedded in Thalia's chest. Tell me what to do. Synchronize your breathing with her pulses, Alara instructed reluctantly. Focus your thoughts on harmony. Morgan closed her eyes, feeling the double rhythm of Thalia's heartbeats growing fainter. She matched her breathing to the pulses, imagining their energies aligning. When their resonance patterns began to synchronize, Morgan felt it, a humming vibration passing between them, intensifying where their skin touched. Now, Alara whispered, carefully gripping the crystal. As she withdrew the shard, Morgan intensified her focus. Pain lanced through her palms where they contacted Thalia's skin, not her own pain, but the Queen's, transferring through their connection. The resonance between them flared brightly, Morgan's cells donating their regenerative energy to Thalia's failing systems. Gasps echoed around them as Morgan's skin began to glow with transferred Etherian luminescence, a phenomenon never before documented. The wound in Thalia's chest sealed partially, stabilizing her condition. When Thalia's eyes finally opened, her first conscious thought flowed directly into Morgan's mind with intimate clarity. You found me across the darkness. Morgan didn't realize she was crying until a tear fell onto their still-joined hands. The droplet shimmered with borrowed bioluminescence. I felt you fatting. I couldn't let you go. The Queen's fingers interlaced with hers. You've claimed me from death itself. Her mental voice carried notes of wonder and something deeper that made Morgan's heart race. No one has touched my essence before. A throat cleared sharply behind them. Kalec stood in the doorway, his expression cold. The Council has convened an emergency session. This incident must be addressed. Morgan reluctantly pulled away, but the connection lingered, a phantom resonance humming between them like an invisible thread. In the council chamber, Kalec spoke with barely controlled rage. The human touched the Queen's bare skin. Such intimacy violates every sacred protocol. The human saved my life, Thalia countered, her strength visibly returning with each moment. And in doing so, proved what our scientists could not demonstrate through experiments. The resonance compatibility is real and far more powerful than we predicted. Morgan stood silent as the council deliberated, acutely aware of Thalia's gaze continuously returning to her. When the session finally adjourned without resolution, the Queen led Morgan to a secluded garden where crystal formations swayed like undersea plants. My people fear what they don't understand, Thalia said softly, her patterns glowing more brightly than Morgan had ever seen. But I understand now. When we connected, I saw your world through your memories, its harshness and beauty. I felt your determination, your compassion. I felt you too, Morgan admitted. Not just your thoughts, but your essence, the weight you carry for your people. Thalia moved closer, the air between them charged with possibility. Our bodies recognize something our minds are only beginning to comprehend. This goes beyond genetic compatibility. Morgan's scientific training demanded caution, but the pull between them defied rational analysis. When Thalia's cool fingertips traced her jawline, Sending resonance cascading through her nerve endings, Morgan surrendered to the inevitable. Their first kiss transcended physical sensation, a merging of consciousness that left Morgan gasping. Where their lips touched, energy exchanged and amplified, creating a feedback loop of sensation and emotion that neither species had vocabulary to describe. "This is what the prophecies meant," Thalia whispered against Morgan's mouth. "Not merely genetic salvation, but completion." As they embraced beneath the luminous crystal canopy, neither noticed the garden responding to their resonance, fractured formations healing, darkened crystals regaining their glow. The first intimate touch between human and Etherian queen had begun something neither science nor prophecy had fully predicted, a transformation that would reshape two worlds forever. Morgan woke to the sound of crystalline chimes, etherish equivalent of an alarm. Disoriented, she reached for Thalia before remembering the queen had left her chambers before dawn for an emergency council session. 3 days had passed since their first kiss, days of scientific breakthroughs interwoven with moments of increasing intimacy that left Morgan's body humming with residual resonance. The door to her quarters burst open without warning. Royal guards entered, not Thalia's personal guards whom Morgan had come to know, but soldiers wearing insignia she didn't recognize. "What's happening?" she demanded, reaching for her clothes. "You are being relocated for your safety," the lead guard announced, his mental voice deliberately opaque. "I need to speak with Queen Thalia. The queen is occupied with matters of state." Morgan's scientific training had taught her to observe details others might miss. The guard's skin patterns displayed agitation rather than protective concern. Their formation suggested custody, not protection. "I'm not going anywhere until I speak with Thalia or Alara," she insisted, backing toward the communication panel. The guard's patience evaporated. The traitor queen has been detained. The Preservation Council now governs Etheris. Morgan's blood ran cold. Detained on what grounds? Violation of sacred protocols, contamination of royal lineage, treason against evolutionary purity, the guard advanced. "You will be contained until arrangements can be made for your return to Earth." Morgan feinted left, then ducked right, trying to reach the emergency communication crystal Thalia had given her. A guard anticipated her move, firing an energy pulse that left her muscles temporarily paralyzed. As they carried her from the royal quarters, Morgan glimpsed the garden where she and Thalia had first kissed, now surrounded by soldiers destroying the newly rejuvenated crystal formations with methodical precision. They imprisoned her in a chamber deep beneath the city, far from the resonance networks. The walls were standard construction rather than living crystal, designed to block telepathic communication. Days passed with only minimal interaction, food delivered by silent guards, no news of the outside world. On the 7th day, the door opened to reveal a familiar face. "Alara," Morgan gasped, rushing forward. The scientist stopped her with a warning gesture. "I convinced them I need blood samples to study the neutralization of human contamination. We have 3 minutes at most." "Where's Thalia? Is she safe?" Alive but weakened, Kalix staged his coup perfectly while she was still recovering from the assassination attempt. He's convinced enough of the Council that human integration will destroy our evolutionary uniqueness. Alara's patterns dimmed with worry. "But there's more. The prophecy translations you were shown were incomplete." Morgan felt a chill. Incomplete how? The original text doesn't merely speak of genetic compatibility. It specifically mentions the Etherian sovereign bonding with the star-crossed healer from the water world. Alara's eyes met Morgan's. A royal consort bond, complete physical and telepathic union. Understanding dawned. That's why Kalix was so opposed. He knew the true prophecy all along, as did Thalia. Alara's patterns fluctuated anxiously. "Morgan, something unprecedented is happening. The crystal gardens where you and Thalia connected. They're regenerating exponentially. The resonance signature is spreading through the network." "Our connection is healing the crystals," Morgan whispered. "Not just healing, evolving them, creating a new harmonic pattern." Alara pressed a small crystal into Morgan's palm. "Loyalists are planning Thalia's rescue. When the moment comes, press this to your heart and focus on her essence." The scientist departed, leaving Morgan with her thoughts whirling. The connection between her and Thalia wasn't just personal or even merely scientific. It was the fulfillment of an ancient prophecy, one that threatened the power structures of an entire civilization. 2 more days passed before chaos erupted outside her cell. Energy discharges and mental shockwaves reverberated through the walls. When the door finally burst open, Morgan faced not royal guards, but a small squad of civilian Etherians led by a young female whose patterns pulsed with determination. "I am Naira, first keeper of the Crystal Gardens," she projected hurriedly. "We must reach the Queen before the execution ceremony." Execution, Morgan's world tilted. Kalak claims purification demands sacrifice. Naira handed Morgan a weapon. "The Loyalists are creating diversions throughout the city. Our window is small." They moved through underground passages, eventually emerging into what appeared to be ancient catacombs beneath the royal complex. Crystalline formations here were primitive compared to the evolved structures above, pulsing with deep, slow rhythms. "The original growth chambers," Naira explained. "Before our ancestors developed resonance enhancement, the old pathways aren't monitored because few remember they exist." They reached a junction where the passages split in 5 directions. Naira hesitated, uncertain. Morgan remembered Alara's crystal. Pressing it to her chest, she closed her eyes and focused on Thalia, the double rhythm of her heartbeats, the cool touch of her skin, the star-filled depths of her eyes. The crystal warmed, emitting a soft violet glow that intensified in the direction of the second passage. "She's there," Morgan said with certainty. They found Thalia in a ceremonial chamber, bound to an ancient stone dais. Her luminescence had dimmed to almost nothing, her once vibrant patterns now dull and static. Naira and her team quickly dispatched the 2 guards while Morgan rushed to the Queen. "Thalia," she whispered, cradling the Queen's face in her hands. The Queen's eyes fluttered open, stars reigniting at Morgan's touch. "Morgan," her mental voice was faint. "They've suppressed my resonance field. The network is fracturing without royal harmony." "I can feel it," Morgan confirmed. She had indeed begun sensing the crystal networks, a development she'd attributed to prolonged exposure but now understood went deeper. "We need to restore your connection." Too weak, Thalia's patterns flickered dangerously. "Kalak has deployed dissonance generators throughout the primary nodes." Morgan looked to Naira. "The garden where we connected, is it still intact beneath the destruction?" "The deeper root structures, yes. The soldiers couldn't reach the primary resonance cores." "Take us there now." They carried Thalia through the passages, emergencies flaring throughout the complex as their escape was discovered. Morgan felt the Queen's life force ebbing despite their physical contact. "Stay with me," she urged, sending her thoughts directly into Thalia's fading consciousness. "We're almost there." The garden's surface was unrecognizable, crystal formations shattered, pathways destroyed. But as they descended to the central grotto, Morgan gasped. Beneath the devastation, new growths had emerged, hybrid formations unlike anything she'd seen on Aetheris, pulsing with energies that resonated with both her human physiology and Etherian patterns. "It's responding to us," Morgan realized, "to our combined signature." They placed Thalia at the center of the formation. Morgan knelt beside her, pressing their foreheads together as the Loyalists established a defensive perimeter. "What we began here," Morgan whispered, "it's already changing your world. The resonance we create together, it's healing the crystal networks." Thalia's eyes found hers, a flicker of hope rekindling. "The prophecy speaks of harmonization, not just salvation, 2 evolutionary paths merging to create something stronger." "Then let's fulfill it." Morgan leaned down, pressing her lips to Thalia's. The kiss deepened as Morgan surrendered completely to their connection. Their resonance fields synchronized, then amplified, creating cascading harmonics that rippled outward through the crystal networks. Where their bodies pressed together, energy flowed and merged, human resilience revitalizing Etherian patterns, Etherian quantum consciousness expanding human perception. Thalia's luminescence returned in a rush, patterns brightening beyond their normal intensity. The crystals surrounding them responded in kind, growing and restructuring at impossible speeds, creating new networks that branched throughout the complex. "They're coming," Naira warned from the perimeter. Morgan helped Thalia to her feet, both of them now glowing with shared resonance. "Can you access the main network?" Thalia closed her eyes, her expression shifting from concentration to wonder. "The new growth patterns?" They're bypassing the dissonance generators, creating alternative pathways. I can reach almost the entire city. Show them, Morgan urged. Show them what's happening to the crystals, what our connection is doing to heal the world. Thalia extended her hands, and Morgan took them without hesitation. Together, they projected their unified consciousness through the crystal network, sending images of regeneration and healing to every connected Etherian in the city. See the truth, Thalia's mental voice resonated, strengthened by Morgan's presence. Not contamination, but completion. Not loss of identity, but evolution. The approaching forces hesitated as the vision spread. Some dropped their weapons immediately, skin patterns shifting to reflect confusion and wonder. Others maintained their hostile stance, though with visibly diminished conviction. Kalak pushed through the ranks, his expression contorted with rage. Illusions and manipulations, the human perverts our sacred networks. The networks respond to our combined resonance, Thalia countered, her voice strong despite her weakened state. Look around you, Kalak, the very world chooses this path. Indeed, throughout the garden and beyond, the crystal formations continued their explosive growth, creating structures of impossible beauty and complexity. Where Morgan and Thalia's combined energy flowed, decay reversed, fractures healed. This is the salvation promised in the prophecies, Morgan added, feeling Thalia's strength flowing through their joined hands. Naira stepped forward, addressing the assembled guards. I am keeper of the crystal gardens. The patterns don't lie. These new formations are more stable, more vibrant than any in recorded history. One by one, the guards lowered their weapons, some kneeling before the queen and her human companion. Kalak, seeing his support evaporate, lunged forward with a crystalline dagger, only to find himself immobilized mid-stride by a pulse of resonant energy from the unified couple. Enough, Kalak, Thalia said softly. Our world chooses life over tradition. As royal loyalists secured Kalak and his remaining supporters, Morgan and Thalia remained at the center of the garden, their bodies still suffused with shared luminescence. Around them, the new hybrid crystals continued to grow and spread, a physical manifestation of what they had become together, neither fully human nor fully Etherian, but something new and powerful. The bond is already forming, Thalia whispered, pressing her forehead to Morgan's. I can feel your thoughts almost as clearly as my own. Morgan smiled, sensing the queen's consciousness intertwined with hers. Is this what your prophecies meant by salvation? No, Thalia replied, her star eyes shining. This is so much more. Dawn broke over Aetheris, casting prismatic light through the newly formed crystal structures that now dominated the city's skyline. 2 weeks had passed since Kalak's failed coup, weeks of healing and transformation that had reshaped both the physical landscape and Etherian society itself. Morgan stood on the balcony of the royal chambers, observing the bustling activity below. Civilians and scientists worked alongside each other, studying the hybrid crystal formations that continued to spread throughout the city. Where the networks reached, health returned. Etherian children born in recent days showed stronger luminescence patterns than any in generations. Admiring your handiwork? Thalia's cool presence materialized beside her, the queen's fingertips brushing Morgan's arm with familiar intimacy. Our handiwork, Morgan corrected, leaning into the touch. Their casual contact now generated only a gentle hum of resonance rather than the overwhelming cascade of their early encounters. Their bodies had adapted, finding equilibrium in constant low-level energy exchange. Thalia's patterns brightened with affection. The council awaits us. The final vote on the integration protocols happens today. Though Kalak and his most fervent supporters remained imprisoned, resistance to human Etherian union persisted among traditionalists. The past 2 weeks had been a delicate dance of political maneuvering and scientific demonstration, with Morgan and Thalia at the center of both. Are you nervous? Morgan asked, sensing undercurrents of tension in Thalia's thought patterns. Their telepathic bond had strengthened daily, allowing increasingly nuanced communication. Not about the vote, Thalia replied, her star-filled eyes meeting Morgan's. About what comes after. Morgan understood immediately. If the council approved the integration protocols, the next step would be the formal Salvation Union, a ceremony combining ancient ritual with scientific purpose that would fully and permanently bond them at quantum, genetic, and spiritual levels. Second thoughts, Morgan asked softly. Thalia's cool hands framed Morgan's face. None about you, but what I'm asking you to sacrifice is no sacrifice at all. Morgan covered Thalia's hands with her own. My life on Earth was about searching for answers in isolation. Here, I found purpose and connection I never imagined possible. They kissed briefly, a gentle exchange of resonance that nonetheless sent ripples through the crystal formations on the balcony. Such physical manifestations of their connection had become commonplace, visible evidence of the power they generated together. The council chamber had been transformed since Morgan first entered it. The formal crescent of seats now surrounded a central platform where hybrid crystal formations grew in intricate patterns. The councilors themselves showed subtle changes, their skin patterns more vibrant, their movements more fluid than when Morgan first arrived. Alara, now elevated to chief scientist of integration, presented the final research findings. The hybrid crystal networks have restored resonance stability to 70% of the degraded areas. More significantly, genetic samples from 30 children born since the first major resonance event show a 43% increase in telomere stability. Counselor Varen, once Kalix's strongest ally, raised his hand. These improvements occurred with only informal, unstructured resonance exchange between the Queen and Dr. Winters. What guarantees do we have that the formalized union won't create unpredictable mutations or destabilize our evolutionary path entirely? Change always carries risk, Thalia acknowledged. But stagnation guaranteed extinction. The evidence surrounds us. Our world responds to this new harmony. Morgan stepped forward. We've conducted over 500 simulations of the complete union process. All indicate stable, beneficial outcomes with controlled energy dispersion through the existing hybrid networks. And you, Dr. Winters, Varen pressed. You would permanently bind yourself to our queen, our world, never to return to your own kind. Morgan met his gaze steadily. I've communicated with Earth. My research colleagues now understand I've made a permanent diplomatic and personal commitment here. As for returning, she glanced at Thalia, we believe the stabilized resonance fields may eventually permit brief visits, allowing for ongoing scientific exchange between our worlds. The final vote passed with only 2 dissenters. As the council adjourned, preparations began immediately for the Salvation Union ceremony. Ancient texts were consulted alongside quantum resonance models. Traditional priests worked with scientists to design a ritual that honored history while embracing evolution. That evening, alone in their chambers, Morgan and Thalia faced the most intimate conversation of their relationship. The union requires complete openness, Thalia explained, her patterns shifting with subtle nervousness. No barriers, no reservations. Our consciousnesses will merge temporarily during the peak resonance phase. Morgan sat beside her on the edge of the bed that had become theirs. You'll see everything, every memory, every doubt, every flaw. As will you. Thalia's cool fingers interlaced with Morgan's warmer ones. Are you afraid of what you'll find in me? No, Morgan answered honestly. I'm afraid of what you'll find in me. I'm still human, Thalia, flawed, selfish sometimes, frightened often. Those so-called flaws are precisely what make you capable of saving us. Thalia leaned forward until their foreheads touched. Your adaptation to fear, your evolution through imperfection, these are the strengths my people have lost. Morgan closed her eyes, feeling the now familiar resonance build between them. Then I have a request before tomorrow. Anything. Let's practice. Morgan's hands found Thalia's face. Not just physically, but the mental connection. I want our first complete joining to happen here privately before it becomes a public ceremony. Thalia's patterns flared with desire and tenderness. The ceremonial amplification won't be present, but our natural resonance is already strong enough for a significant connection. They moved together with practiced familiarity that had lost none of its wonder. Bodies aligned, cool against warm, luminescence against solidity. Their kiss deepened beyond physical sensation as Morgan deliberately lowered the mental barriers she'd maintained even during their most intimate moments. Thalia gasped as Morgan's consciousness opened fully to her for the first time. Her own mental shields dissolved in response, creating a feedback loop of shared sensation and emotion. Where their skin touched, resonance fields synchronized and amplified, creating harmonic patterns that spread outward through the crystal structures embedded in the royal chambers. I see you. Thalia's thoughts flowed directly into Morgan's mind, no longer separate communications, but internal dialogue. All of you. Morgan surrendered to the connection, allowing memories to surface. Childhood loneliness that drove her to science, professional disappointments, failed relationships, moments of doubt and fear. Alongside these flowed her strength, determination, compassion, and the growing love that had brought her to this moment. In return, she received Thalia's essence, the crushing weight of responsibility carried since childhood, the loneliness of royal isolation, the fear of watching her world die around her, and the desperate hope Morgan had rekindled. As their physical intimacy deepened, the mental connection expanded exponentially. Sensations doubled and reflected, pleasure amplified through shared experience. The boundaries between them blurred, creating a unified consciousness that experienced both bodies simultaneously. Throughout the city, failing crystals rejuvenated, damaged networks restored themselves, and sleeping Etherians dreamed of renewal. As they slowly separated, returning to individual consciousness, both women bore visible changes. Morgan's skin now held subtle luminescent patterns that pulsed in rhythm with her heartbeat. Thalia's stellar eyes had gained flecks of amber that matched Morgan's human irises. "That was just the preview," Morgan whispered, awed by what they'd experienced without ceremonial amplification. The Salvation Union ceremony took place at dawn in the Crystal Heart, Aetheris' most sacred site. Morgan wore a garment woven from crystal fibers that shifted colors with her emotions. Thalia appeared in royal regalia modified to incorporate hybrid crystal elements that bridged tradition and evolution. As they approached the central dais, Morgan sensed the eyes of the entire civilization upon them. Even Earth watched through limited transmissions, mankind's first official witness to an alien evolutionary watershed. Two evolutionary paths diverged across the stars, the chief priest intoned, now converging to create salvation through union. When the moment of final union arrived, Morgan and Thalia pressed their foreheads together, synchronizing their breathing. The ceremonial amplifiers magnified their natural resonance 1,000-fold, creating a cascading harmonic that spread outward through the hybrid networks. Their consciousness merged completely, experiencing simultaneous existence in both bodies and beyond, flowing through the crystal networks, touching every connected Etherian mind. Throughout Aetheris, the transformation manifested physically. Children too weak to form coherent thoughts suddenly found their minds clearing. Elders whose patterns had faded felt renewed strength flowing through their essence. 6 months later, Morgan stood with Thalia in the Royal Observatory, watching the first diplomatic vessel from Earth approach Aetheris. The preliminary exchange program would bring human scientists to study the hybrid technologies, while Etherian knowledge would help advance human understanding of consciousness. "Nervous?" Thalia asked, sensing Morgan's mixed emotions about seeing humans for the first time since her transformation. Morgan touched one of the luminescent patterns that now adorned her skin permanently. "They'll see me as changed, different." "As you are," Thalia's cool fingers interlaced with hers, the familiar resonance humming between them. "As we both are, changed by choice for the salvation of a world." "Two worlds," Morgan whispered, watching the approaching ship. "Both now with futures they wouldn't have had otherwise." Thalia's arms encircled her from behind, the queen's patterns brightening with affection. The prophecies spoke of salvation through union. They never mentioned love. "Perhaps that was assumed," Morgan replied, turning in Thalia's embrace. "The most powerful force in two universes." As their lips met, resonance cascaded through the crystal networks yet again, a harmonic reminder that salvation had come not through conquest or subjugation, but through the most fundamental force in existence, the power of genuine connection across the stars.